And welcome to another edition of 18 Minutes with 180 Markets. Well, friends, you all know we are in the golden age of medicine. And especially over the last 10, 15 years, there have been so many discoveries in the cancer field, in the heart disease field, and so much more. People are living longer because of these breakthroughs. And that's why I'm thrilled today to be joined by Gary Phillips, Managing Director of Syntara, because Syntara is targeting myelofibrosis, which is certainly a big market and really exciting information is coming out. And normally, friends, it is a very long cycle to bring a drug or a product or something to the market. But in this case here, there is exciting news over the next circa 12 months. And with that, Gary, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for your time, Greg.
Great. Hey, Gary, Syntara, myelofibrosis. For people that are not quite so familiar with this disease, can you just discuss it a little bit from a high level?
Sure. So myelofibrosis is actually a cancer of the bone marrow. Now, the bone marrow, the core of our bones, is actually an active organ, and it's responsible for producing production of red cells, white cells, and platelets. So it's our body's manufacturing unit for blood, if you will. So in this particular disease, the bone marrow becomes scarred or fibrotic, and like in any organ, once you get scarring within it, the organ becomes non-functional, and the bone marrow is no different. So as the scar tissue takes over the normal tissue in the bone marrow becomes less able to produce red cells, white cells, and platelets.
Right.
Number of impacts then on patients. So patients then suffer from a series of symptoms. Their spleens get very enlarged as they try to take over production, and they have a life expectancy of around about 5 years. The only drug which can treat it at the moment is a drug called a JAK inhibitor, which is very good at controlling symptoms and reducing spleen size, but doesn't do anything about the underlying fibrosis or scarring of the bone marrow. It doesn't change the course of the disease. So that's where we come in.
The JAKs, they're more of a extender, if you will, but they're not ultimately a solution, unfortunately.
They're a symptomatic treatment of
Right.
the symptoms of myelofibrosis, but they don't change the course of the disease. Despite that, sales of JAK inhibitors exceed $1 billion a year. So there's a huge unmet need there for something that will actually help these patients not only live a better life, but a longer life.
Right. Well, as you said, people are taking what they can right now, but I
Yeah.
guess therein lies the opportunity for Syntara and SNT 5505. Maybe just talk about your approach to the disease and what you can bring to the table.
So we've developed actually it's a whole program that's been in the company for a number of years. Syntara is a company with its own drug discovery group, so biologists and chemists. So all of the drugs we produce come from our own hands, their own IP. They're not licensed in for anybody else, so they're 100% owned by the company. We've become global leaders in one particular enzyme, lysyl oxidase, which is a compound which is at the final stage of scarring. So if you can imagine, you cut yourself,
Right.
then the body floods that area with protein fibers called collagen.
Okay.
The collagen fibers then, in the presence of the enzyme, form cross-links between them. They become organized into a stiff tissue, which is the fibrosis. For those of you that haven't have a medical background, you can think of it a bit like if you went to your hardware store and you bought some fiberglass to mend a hole in your speedboat or your car or your roof or whatever.
Right.
The fiberglass mesh is a loose, floppy weave. And then you buy a hardener that you pour into it, and then you let it set, and you form this really tough skin. Same thing. So the collagen is the fiberglass mesh. The lysyl oxidase is the hardener that goes there. So we've got a drug which completely blocks that enzyme, the hardener, so the cross links don't form. The tissue becomes softer, and then you get less collagen released and less enzyme released as well. So you actually see a reduction in the area of fibrosis in any organ where we use our drugs. So if it was skin scarring, or it's in the fibrosis of the liver, the heart, the kidney. But in this case, in myelofibrosis, we've already demonstrated that when you take our drug for 6 months, a considerable number of patients show a reduced amount of fibrosis in the bone marrow. So we show that we reduce fibrosis.
Right. And I suppose, again, just reiterating the point, that is what is different than the JAKs today of what are being used today, where they just prolong
Yeah.
it. Yours is actually reversing it. Now, your product, you are in phase 2 right now?
Yeah, so we've the drug's already gone through sort of phase 1 healthy volunteer studies. It's got an IND from the FDA, so the FDA have already approved the preclinical and all the tox and the CMC, the
Right.
manufacturing. It's got an FDA orphan drug designation because myelofibrosis is an orphan drug. It's an orphan disease. We've done one phase 2 study in patients who are end of life. So these were patients who had been taking a JAK inhibitor for some time, were no longer these JAK inhibitors also cause drops in blood cells. So the patients often see drops in platelets and red cells, and eventually they have to come off the drug. And then
So those are the side effects.
when they come off the drug, because of the side effects, they've got about a year to live. So in those patients with about a year to live, we've already trialed the drug for 6 months. We released the data from that in December last year at the American Society of Hematology, and we show that we in half the patients we reduced the fibrosis in the bone marrow, and all the patients that finished the study showed some improvements, stabilization or improvements in red cell count and platelet count, and some of them showed improvements in symptom score as well. So real signs that the drug has got an efficacy, and it looked very safe. We took that evidence back to the FDA and said, are you happy for us to go on? And they were. So since December last year, we've been recruiting a study where we're using the drug on top of a JAK inhibitor. So these are now patients at the beginning of their disease or partway through. And we've fully recruited the study. So 2 weeks ago, we announced that the study was fully recruited, an open label study with 15 patients. And we're looking to we're going to follow these patients for 12 months. The first data point where we'll come out and publicly disclose information, we estimate will be the first week of December. So that coincides with the American Society of Hematology, which is the world's largest hematology conference, about 30,000 hematologists from all over the world. So it's our shop window. That's where we go to show what we're doing, where other companies that are interested as well will look at what we're doing. So that's the news flow now. Is we're fully recruited. Time is ticking. We will have results in the beginning of December, and then full results by this time next year.
Right. So that is fantastic. And I guess it's a nice coincidence to have that conference along with when you will have those internal results, which is fantastic. I'm just curious, what would be, in your mind, success from those results? In other words, would it be a 50% reduction? And I know it's very subjective, if you will, but I'm just curious to see.
Yeah, it's an interesting clinical question, because until we start doing this, we don't know how quickly you can reverse the fibrotic process. So this is, we stop the cross-linking. The area starts to get repopulated with normal tissue because you've reduced the fibrosis area, and then that normal tissue starts to produce red cells and platelets again. So why we're studying this drug for 12 months is because we think we'll see some good signs at 6 months, but it may be 12 months before you see the full effect. Certainly in the last, we could still see patients improving. So, but in December, we expect to see, first of all, an endorsement of the drug's safety profile. I mentioned that the JAK inhibitors are particularly poorly tolerated. So all the clinicians that we talk to say, first and foremost, we'd love to have a drug which doesn't get the patients to make them worse, because it's going to be added on top of a drug which is already quite nasty. So that's the first goal. The second goal will be to show a reduction in the fibrosis in the bone marrow in these patients. We showed 50% of the patients in the last study showed an improvement. We'd expect to see that or better in this study. And then finally, we'd like to see some improvements in symptom score would be a really good overall benefit for these patients to show at that point, and maybe some improvements in their bloods as well. So the red cells and platelets actually recovering as we go forward.
Yeah, it just sounds like such an opportunity. And as you said, it's such an unmet need. And as investors also, there's certainly a big enough total addressable market. It sounds like $1 billion plus, where there's something in there to create shareholder value as well. And also, I must say, as far as drugs go, you are on a fairly short timeline for trials. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, if you compare it with our valuation, right? So with a market cap of around about 40 million at this point, with a phase 2 study being run in Australia, Taiwan, South Korea, and the US, clinical sites globally, a US INDA under an FDA orphan drug designation.
Right.
That with phase 2 data now only about 4 or 5 months away.
Yeah.
We are an unusual opportunity at this particular point in time. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of value and where is the valuation, there's also another piece of value here that I really want to talk about. And sometimes in medicine, as you well know, you get two for oneers, if you will.
Yeah.
Talking about, please, from Syntara, about scarring overall and where there's
Yeah.
another opportunity potentially for the company.
Yeah. So once as I think I mentioned at the beginning, we've published widely on our drug. Nobody else is producing a pan-LOX inhibitor, so we have a lead in this area. We've been the only company to successfully produce a really good inhibitor for it. So as we started to publish, other scientists worldwide came to us and said, look, we think this enzyme is involved in lots of other diseases. Can you give us some of your compounds so we can trial it in our models? And on the back of that, our work has been published in Nature, which is the highest impact scientific journal globally, multiple times. So we've got publications in pancreatic cancer,
Right.
where we improve survival when you add it onto chemotherapy. Hepatocellular carcinoma or liver cancer is another one. But more locally, of interest is skin scarring. So
Yes.
Professor Fiona Wood from Perth, University of Western Australia, came to probably 5 years ago now and said, look, she thought lysyl oxidase was involved in the scarring on the skin. Could she use some of our compounds and put them in her animal models, which she did. They've published in Nature Communications a couple of years back, and we've gone on and done a clinical study with them in patients with established scars and shown that we can fundamentally change the structure of scars on the skin, established scars, so reversing an existing scar. And we're currently involved in a study with her now looking at patients who have burns, who have a skin graft, to show that we can stop the development of a bad scar going forward. And we're going to look at keloid scarring as well, and look at whether patients with a young but existing scar or prevalence of causing a keloid scar, whether those patients we could help by treating them with our drug. In this case, with a topical agent that you would put on your skin to stop the scar emerging. So yeah, there's lots of applications here, and the skin is certainly a really exciting one. There's loads of opportunity. The market is north of $3.5 billion just for hypertrophic and keloid scarring alone. So, and there's no other pharmacological treatments that are really well advanced in the clinic for that area. So there's a real unmet need there as well.
Yeah, and what should we expect from Syntara as far as in the scarring field over the next 12 months?
So we've got the phase 2 study in myelofibrosis due to report end of the year interim data, and then full data by the middle of next year. The same drug is in 2 different studies in myelodysplastic syndrome, which is another blood cancer. Both of those funded by grants, so non-dilutive funding. That we should get interim data in the second half, middle of next year, second half of next year, interim data from those studies as well. So for that drug. The skin scarring one, we expect to see some data from the burn study by the end of next year. And the keloid scarring one, we think will start up at the beginning of next year and probably run for a year, 18 months. So there's a lot of data to come from phase 2 programs from Syntara, over the next 18 months.
Got it. And Gary, all these trials in the business, it does cost money. Capital-wise, though, you're in a good position right now. Can you just talk about your capital position?
Yeah, so we've got a pro forma at the end of June. We had $13 million. Some of your listeners may know that Syntara was called Pharmaxis.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yes.
And so at the end of 23, we sold the mannitol business off to another company. We reduced our cash expenses each year by $14 million. So we took a huge amount of cost out of the business. So the cost of running Syntara going forward with all the clinical studies we've talked about is around about $1 million a month. We had 13 million in the bank, pro forma in the bank at the end of June, which includes an R&D tax credit that we're due to come, $1 million to come back from our landlord with the facility that we gave up. So we have 12 months worth of cash. It takes us out to the middle of next year. Just beyond the middle of next year, which takes us through this interim data that we get in myelofibrosis.
And that's critical.
And which is absolutely critical. An interim chat with the FDA. So we'll take that data from December and go to the FDA and ask them for their approval to go on and do a pivotal study. So we'll talk to them about study design, and then the full data coming out around the middle of next year. So yeah, this is going to trigger, you know, a real value appreciation point for the company.
Right. Hey, Gary, it takes so much, but as I said, you know, I want to thank you in advance because we are in this golden age. There are so many cures out there, so many unmet needs, and hopefully the next 5 years looks even better than the past 5 years. Gary, do you have any closing comments for the audience?
Yeah, no, I think in looking at a potential investment in Syntara, I think I'd consider a couple of things. One is, you know, the stock is at a historical low point, based on the trading that we did after the exit from the mannitol business at the end of last year. So this is a once-off opportunity, I would say. I think, you know, companies in the biotech space tend to track upwards towards phase 2 data. And you're looking at a company with phase 2 data, not just from one study, which is the myelofibrosis study, but also we've got 2 MDS studies, a skin scarring study. There's more than one shot on goal. We are quite a sophisticated integrated biotech company, with a great track record behind us, and a lot of news flow coming in the next 12 to 18 months.
Gary, very exciting times. Thank you very much. We will absolutely stay in touch.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg.
Bye-bye.